Hi, it's Mike Connor, and I wanted to take a few minutes today to talk about how we work with resentment or anger in the Insight One seminar. And it feels especially appropriate right now, given what's happening in the world. It feels like there's a lot of people taking sides. Seems like conflict is rising in so many different spaces. And what can we do to begin to personally begin to shift that in a way that brings us back together? In a way that we can resolve some of our differences more peacefully and more appropriately. One of the things that happens with resentment, and we explore it in a similar way that we look at guilt, is we look at two sides. We look at an action side and an image side. So anytime you're experiencing resentment towards someone else or upset at somebody else, usually there's something you're looking at in terms of their action. And so let's just say, if I use an example, let's say that I'm experiencing some resentment towards my boss. And so I say, what was the action that they took that I got resentful about? So maybe I said, they were not respectful. And they demanded something at an unreasonable time frame. So they were unreasonable. And let's say that it felt like their attitude was also kind of so direct that it almost felt rude to us or rude to me. So as I use this example, I would like to invite you to think about someone that maybe recently you felt some resentment towards. Or maybe it wasn't so recent. You might have resentment that goes back months or years. You might have resentment towards your parents from something that happened years ago, or somebody, or maybe a partner or a spouse that you still haven't resolved something in terms of your relationship, or maybe you got divorced. All kinds of things build up inside of us around resentment. Some of it that can be relatively recent, some of it which can go back many years. And one of the things we want to look at around this is the importance of beginning to recognize the value of letting go of resentment, not only in terms of our ability to relate to others more effectively, but also in terms of our relationship with ourselves and our own health. So I just began a little example of some of the actions that maybe occurred in terms of how I perceived an interaction with my boss, okay? Now over here we have an image. The images we hold is the image of what should they have been. What should a good boss be? Or my image of what should a good spouse be? What should a good president be or leader be? Whatever it might be. A series of shoulds that sit inside of me about my image of how they think they should be. So a good boss should be respectful. They should be considerate. Thoughtful. So just giving you a few examples. I could go on and on, make a list. There's probably a lot more that I might be holding inside of me. And the work that we do on Insight is always looking at self-awareness, recognizing what's beneath the surface, what am I not fully aware of. And a lot of these shoulds or beliefs about how we think others should be, the world should be, we really need to spend some time to really recognize and bring to the surface so we can see what's happening. Because oftentimes we're acting out of images that we don't even realize we're fully holding. So what happens is that when there's an action by somebody else, it's violating the image that I'm holding about how they should be, we get resentment. And resentment is like a wall. Or sometimes we call it the savior of our image in the face of an action that violates our image. And so we get to hold on to our image in the space of an action that we feel is violating our image. Again, that action can be from anything or anybody outside of us. So we get to hold on our image. The problem with this is this allows us to hold on to the image in the face of this action, but the result is we end up with resentment. And one of the things we ask is, who does resentment really hurt? Does it really hurt the other person? It does potentially, because relationships get broken down. Very difficult to be in a relationship with someone else when you're holding resentment or judgment towards them or anger towards them. So it definitely has an impact on those relationships. But resentment held inside of us, oftentimes the story we make up inside of ourselves, we sometimes look at the word resentment. It's like we're trying to send somebody a message because we're upset at them. And we want them to get this message. But because they don't get the message, we keep resending it. But the problem is that anger or resentment is sitting inside of us. And so is it, who is it really hurting? And what we know is anger and resentment held inside has an impact on our health. So if you want to begin to let go of resentment, both in terms of helping to build a relationship, helping to create the space for more peaceful resolution, but also helping your own health, we say, how do I let go of the resentment? Well, on the action side, because we have to balance these two, somehow these two have to begin to balance. We could ask someone to change their actions. We could request someone to change their action to fit our image. Now, the challenge is with somebody else is most of us have not been very successful getting somebody else to change their actions, especially if we're coming from judgment, especially if we're judging their actions and we want them to change. You know how you respond when somebody wants you to do that. You almost kick your heels in and get even more committed to do the thing because somebody else wants you to change. So you might, if you have a very close relationship with a spouse or a partner or a boss, you can be open about what's going on and really invite them to hear some feedback that they could change. However, in the area of resentment, if we're really going to shift it, we have to look at our image, the image or the should that we're holding. And how do we begin to shift that image in a way that begins to match over here? And one of the keys here is our willingness or our ability to do a couple of things. One is, can we really get in the shoes of the other person? Can we really begin to see the world from their standpoint? Because we make up a whole bunch of stories in our head over here about what we think they're doing and why. And almost always that's not really what's going on for them. So how do we get into their shoes? How do we see the world from their standpoint so we can begin to understand where they're coming from, what might be going on from them? Related to that is, can we allow our image the space for them to be human? When we work with guilt, we try to give ourselves the gift of forgiveness, more compassion for ourselves so we don't have such a strong image that sometimes violates our own actions. With resentment, can we give the gift of humanity to the people around us? They're also dealing with the struggles of life. They're also probably under pressure or under stress. They've got upbringings where they have, trauma they're probably still healing, a whole series of things. And so we look at this image and can we say, yes, a boss should be respectful, considerate, thoughtful, and sometimes they're also a human being. And sometimes they make mistakes. And they don't always act the way that we would want them to. And so we begin to shift our image to allow for more space for humanity, to allow for if we can get into their shoes, begin to recognize where are they coming from, what's the stress they're under, what's the pain they're dealing with, what's their confusion. And when we can bring in compassion, when we can begin to bring in forgiveness, we can allow them the gift of being a human being and allow the fact that they make mistakes just like we do. We begin to lessen this. We begin to lessen the resentment. We begin to make a connection between these two. And it allows us to be able to relate to them more effectively, have open communication, and it allows us to begin to release and let go of that resentment and some of that anger we've been holding so that we also can stay healthy inside of ourselves. And this is why at the core of our work, both with resentment and with guilt, is this area of compassion, of forgiveness, of empathy. So I hope this was helpful. Certainly think of something in your life where this seems to apply and put it into practice, because this seems especially important in the world that we're living in today. Thank you for listening and have a great day.